After my engagement, I quietly transferred my grandparents' $5 million fortune into a trust fund, just in case. Welcome back to another episode of Story Threads podcast. My name is Emma, and today I'm here with Jessica, who came all the way from Portland, Oregon, to share today's absolutely unbelievable story. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Jessica, thank you so much for being here.
Emma, thank you for having me here today. So, picture this. It's March 2023 and I'm sitting in my fiancé David's family living room, surrounded by his parents, his sister Ashley, and his brother-in-law, all gathered around this massive mahogany dining table for what was supposed to be our engagement celebration dinner. Everything seemed perfect on the surface. Crystal glasses, expensive wine, his mom Linda had even made this elaborate roast. But then David's dad Richard starts talking about our future finances, and suddenly the whole conversation takes this weird turn. He's asking me detailed questions about my grandparents' estate. Stuff that honestly felt way too personal for a celebration dinner. Like, how much was the house worth? What about their investment accounts? Did I have access to everything yet? And here's the thing that made my stomach drop. David was nodding along like they'd discussed this before. Without me, I kept my face neutral, but inside I was like, wait, what is happening right now? Because these people barely knew me and they're acting like my inheritance is somehow their business. That night, driving home, David casually mentions that his family thinks we should combine our assets once we're married. You know, for easier financial planning. He said it so smoothly, like it was the most natural thing in the world. But here's what he didn't know, and what his family definitely didn't know, is that 3 weeks earlier, I'd already quietly transferred my grandparents' entire $5 million estate into an irrevocable trust fund. With me as the sole trustee. Call it intuition, call it paranoia. But something about the way David had been asking questions about my grandparents' money ever since we got engaged just felt off. Little comments here and there. Suggestions about how I should manage the inheritance. Offers to help me with the paperwork. My grandparents, Harold and Margaret, had passed away 6 months apart the previous year. They'd raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 12. That house on the coast with its red brick walls and the garden my grandmother tended every morning, it wasn't just an inheritance to me. It was my childhood, my memories, my safety net. And I'd watched Harold build that wealth over decades through careful investments and his small shipping business. Every dollar represented his hard work and sacrifice. So when David's family started talking about our money at that dinner table, acting like my inheritance was some kind of joint windfall, every alarm bell in my head started going off. Because here's the thing, I've seen this movie before. My best friend Sarah went through something similar with her ex-husband. Started with helpful suggestions about managing money, ended with him draining her accounts and disappearing. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling while David slept peacefully next to me, probably dreaming about how his family was going to benefit from marrying into money. But what none of them realized was that I'd already been 3 steps ahead. The house, the investments, the bank accounts, all of it was locked away where no one could touch it except me. And honestly, watching David and his family make plans for money they'd never get their hands on was about to become the most satisfying experience of my life. Because while they were busy counting chickens that would never hatch, I was quietly documenting every single conversation, every assumption they made about my wealth, every entitled comment about what we would do with our inheritance. Little did they know the real show was just beginning. So here's where things get really messy, Emma. Over the next few weeks after that dinner, David started getting more aggressive with his suggestions about my inheritance. Like one morning he's making breakfast, which again super weird for him, and casually mentions that his dad Richard knows this amazing financial advisor who specializes in optimizing inherited wealth for young couples. He slides this business card across the counter to me and I'm thinking, did this man just try to pimp out my dead grandparents' money? But the worst part was how he said it, you know? Like he was doing me this huge favor. Jess, babe, you're so smart with everything else, but money management isn't really your thing, right? Let the professionals handle it. And I'm standing there holding my coffee mug, looking at this business card, thinking about how my grandfather Harold built a multi-million-dollar shipping business from literally nothing. But sure, David, I clearly need help managing money. Then his sister Ashley. Oh my God, Ashley, she starts showing up at my apartment unannounced. Always with some excuse. Oh, I was in the neighborhood. Or, I brought you those cookies you mentioned liking. But every single time she'd somehow steer the conversation toward my grandparents' house. How big it was. Whether I planned to renovate. If I'd considered selling since it was so much house for just one person. One afternoon she's sitting on my couch and she goes, "You know, Jess, David mentioned you inherited some investments too. That's so exciting. Have you thought about diversifying? Maybe putting some into David's family business?" I nearly choked on my tea. Because here's the thing about David's family business. It's barely staying afloat. Richard runs this struggling hardware store that's been hemorrhaging money for years. And suddenly they're all financial experts who should manage my multi-million-dollar inheritance? But the absolute worst was David's mom, Linda. Sweet, church-going Linda, who bakes cookies for every church bake sale and volunteers at the library. She invites me for lunch one day, just the two of us. And I'm thinking, finally, some normal mother-in-law bonding time, right? Wrong. We're sitting in this quaint little cafe and she starts with this whole speech about how family wealth should benefit the whole family. How my grandparents would have wanted their money to help build a strong foundation for David and me. Then she leans across the table. I swear, Emma, she actually leans in like she's about to tell me some big secret, and whispers, "You know, dear, David's father and I have been married 32 years. We've learned that the key to a lasting marriage is complete financial transparency. No secrets. Complete financial transparency. From the woman whose husband has been hiding their business debt for the past 5 years. And here's what really got to me. She kept referring to my inheritance as family money. Not my money. Not even our money. Family money. Like the second I said yes to David's proposal, everything I owned automatically belonged to the Carter clan. But the moment I knew something was seriously wrong was when I found David going through my mail. I come home from work one evening and he's sitting at my kitchen table with this stack of envelopes spread out in front of him. Bank statements, investment documents, correspondence from my estate attorney. When I ask what he's doing, he doesn't even look embarrassed. He just shrugs and says, "I was organizing things for you. You know, getting a better picture of our financial situation." Our financial situation. Not my financial situation. Ours. And that's when I see it. This legal document partially hidden under some other papers. David had actually contacted a lawyer about changing my trust arrangements after we got married. He wasn't just planning to access my inheritance. He was planning to restructure it. I kept my voice totally calm and asked him about it. And this man I was supposed to marry, looks me straight in the eye and says, "Jess, I'm just trying to protect us. These trust funds, they're complicated. You could lose everything if something happens to you." But what he really meant was, "I want to make sure I get everything if something happens to you." That night, I lay in bed listening to David sleep and I started connecting all the dots. The rushed engagement after just 8 months of dating. The sudden interest in my family history. The way he'd steered every conversation about our future toward topics involving my inheritance. Even our engagement had been calculated. He'd proposed right after I'd mentioned that my grandparents had left me comfortable. Before that, he'd been non-committal about moving in together, let alone marriage. And his family, God, they'd welcomed me with open arms the moment David mentioned I had inherited money. Before that, I'd met them exactly twice in 8 months. But here's what David and his lovely family didn't know. While they were busy making plans for my money, I'd been documenting everything. Every conversation about my finances. Every suggestion about investment strategies. Every casual comment about how I should handle my inheritance. I had recordings on my phone, screenshots of text messages, even photos of that legal document David had tried to hide. Because something my grandfather Harold taught me when I was young was this: "Jessica, people will show you who they really are if you just pay attention. And when they do, believe them the first time." David and his family had shown me exactly who they were. They saw me as a lottery ticket, not a person. My dead grandparents' life savings was just a windfall they deserved to access through marriage. What they didn't realize was that while they were busy planning my financial future, I was busy planning their financial disappointment. So Emma, after I found David going through my mail with that lawyer document, things escalated really fast. Like within days, his whole family started acting like they owned me. The next weekend, Linda calls and invites me to this family meeting at their house. She says it's to discuss wedding planning, but when I get there, it's David, his parents, Ashley, and this stranger in a suit sitting at their dining room table. Turns out it's that financial advisor Richard had mentioned. Mr. Peterson. And they've already scheduled this whole presentation about optimizing inherited wealth for newlyweds. I'm sitting there watching this man flip through PowerPoint slides about trust restructuring, investment diversification, and spousal financial protection strategies, while David's family nods along like they're already my financial guardians. But here's the kicker. Mr. Peterson starts talking about specific numbers. Not general estimates. Actual figures from my inheritance. He mentions the exact value of my grandparents' house, down to the last assessed dollar. He knows about the shipping company stock dividends. He even references the specific investment accounts my grandfather had set up. Information I had never shared with David. Information that should have been completely private. And that's when I realized David hadn't just been going through my mail. He'd been photographing documents probably for weeks, maybe months. I kept my face neutral during the entire presentation, even asked a few polite questions. But inside, I was calculating how much they already knew and how much damage they could do with that information. After the meeting, David pulls me aside and says, "See? I told you my family just wants to help us build a strong financial foundation." But what really broke my heart was when his mom hugged me goodbye and whispered, "Don't worry, dear. We'll take good care of everything. You won't have to stress about managing all that money anymore." Like I was some helpless child who couldn't handle her own inheritance. That night, I called my best friend Sarah. Remember I mentioned her earlier? She's the one who went through something similar with her ex-husband. I'm crying on the phone telling her everything and she just listens. Then she says, "Jess, honey, you know what you have to do, right? You can't wait for this to get worse." And she was right. Because 2 days later, Ashley shows up at my apartment with actual real estate brochures. She spreads them across my kitchen counter and starts talking about how my grandparents' house is way too big for just one person, and how the market is perfect for selling right now. Then she pulls out her phone and shows me this real estate app where she's already created a listing for my house. Not posted but fully prepared. Professional photos that I definitely didn't authorize, a detailed description, even a suggested asking price. She'd been inside my grandparents' house taking pictures, measuring rooms probably while I was at work. When I ask her how she got in, she just smiles and says, "David gave me the spare key. We thought it would be good to get a head start on the appraisal process." The spare key I had given David for emergencies. And he just handed it over to his sister so she could treat my family home like her personal real estate project. But the absolute final straw came that Friday night. David and I are supposed to have dinner at this nice restaurant. Our usual weekly date night. Instead, he takes me to his parents' house again, where they've set up this entire intervention-style meeting. His dad starts with this speech about how they've noticed I'm struggling with financial anxiety, and how it's affecting my relationship with David. His mom chimes in about how I seem overwhelmed by the responsibility of managing my inheritance and how they just want to lighten my burden. Ashley adds that she's found several amazing investment opportunities that would be perfect for my money. And David, my fiancé, the man I was supposed to marry, sits there nodding while his family psychoanalyzes my financial decisions and presents their plan to basically take over my entire inheritance. They'd prepared this whole folder of documents. Powers of attorney, investment transfer forms, even a property deed modification that would add David's name to my house. All pre-filled with my information. Just waiting for my signature. When I ask where they got all my personal details, social security number, account information, property records, David actually has the nerve to say, "I've been keeping track of things for us, babe. You know, for our future." Keeping track. Like my inheritance was already his to manage. That's the moment, Emma. That's when I stopped being the confused, hurt fiancé and started being the woman who was going to protect what my grandparents died to leave me. I looked at each of them. Richard with his entitled smile, Linda with her fake maternal concern, Ashley with her greedy excitement, and David with his complete lack of guilt about violating my privacy and trust. And I said very calmly, "I need some time to think about all this. It's a lot to process." Which wasn't a lie. I did need time to think. But not about signing their papers. I needed time to figure out exactly how I was going to make them pay for every single violation, every assumption they'd made about my money, every moment they'd spent planning my financial future without me. Because while they thought they were cornering me into submission, they'd actually just shown me their entire playbook. They'd revealed every greedy motivation, every manipulative tactic, every legal vulnerability they were creating for themselves. And what they didn't know was that during that whole intervention meeting, I had my phone recording everything. Every word, every admission, every threat disguised as family concern. By the time I left their house that night, I wasn't just angry anymore. I was strategic. Because if the Carter family wanted to play games with my inheritance, I was about to show them what happens when someone with $5 million and absolutely nothing left to lose decides to play back. After that nightmare intervention at David's parents' house, I knew I had to be smarter than all of them combined. So I went home that night and did something they never expected. I started planning like my life depended on it. First thing I did was call my estate attorney, Daniel Morrison. I'd worked with him when setting up the trust, and I knew he'd understand the gravity of what was happening. When I told him about the pre-filled legal documents they'd prepared, the unauthorized access to my house, and David photographing my private financial records, Daniel went silent for like 30 seconds. Then he said, "Jessica, what you're describing isn't just family drama. This is attempted financial fraud. We need to document everything." So that's exactly what I did. I became a detective in my own life. I started recording every conversation with David and his family on my phone. Every dinner, every casual chat about my financial stress, every suggestion about how I should manage my inheritance. I took photos of every document they'd shown me. Those transfer forms, the power of attorney papers, even that real estate listing Ashley had prepared without my permission. I created a detailed timeline of every violation. When David had gone through my mail. When Ashley had been in my house taking photos. When his parents had somehow obtained my private financial information for that advisor meeting. But here's the thing, Emma. While I was building this case against them, they thought they were winning. David started acting like my inheritance was already his. He'd make comments about our house on the coast and our investment portfolio. He even started telling his friends that we were planning to sell my grandparents' place and buy something bigger. His mom Linda began treating me like I was already under their family's financial guardianship. She'd pat my hand and say things like, "Don't worry dear, we'll handle all the complicated money stuff for you." Ashley got even bolder. She started bringing contractors to my house, without asking, to get estimates for renovations before the sale. She'd just show up with these guys and walk them through my grandparents' rooms like she owned the place. And the worst part? David gave her permission every single time. He'd just hand over the spare key like my family home was community property. But what they didn't realize was that every contractor visit, every unauthorized entry, every assumption they made about my property was being carefully documented. I had Daniel install a discreet security system in the house. Nothing obvious, just small cameras that would capture anyone entering without my explicit permission. Within 2 weeks, we had footage of Ashley bringing not just contractors, but actual real estate agents through the house. She was actively showing my property to potential buyers while I was at work. The recordings from our family dinners were even more damning. I had Richard on audio explaining how they planned to restructure Jessica's trust to benefit the whole family. I had Linda discussing how they'd convinced their lawyer that I was too young and overwhelmed to handle such a large inheritance responsibly. Most importantly, I had David admitting that he'd been tracking my finances since we got engaged. That he'd photographed bank statements, investment documents, even my grandmother's personal letters about the inheritance. All of this while Daniel was quietly strengthening the legal walls around my trust. He added additional security measures, changed all the access codes, and created a paper trail showing that any attempts to modify the trust without my explicit witnessed consent would be legally impossible. But my favorite part of this whole preparation phase was watching them get more and more confident. David started shopping for expensive watches, talking about this European honeymoon he wanted to take. Ashley began telling people she was going into real estate development with her new capital. Richard made plans to expand his hardware store with what he called family investment funds. They were spending money they didn't have, making plans based on assets they'd never access, counting chickens that would never hatch. And every single overconfident move they made gave me more evidence for what Daniel started calling the most clear-cut case of attempted inheritance fraud he'd seen in 20 years of estate law. The beautiful irony was that while they thought they were manipulating me into submission, they were actually building their own legal destruction, one greedy assumption at a time. By the end of that month, I had enough documented evidence to not only protect my inheritance permanently, but to pursue criminal charges if I wanted to. But I wasn't ready to play my cards yet. Because I'd learned something crucial about the Carter family: they couldn't help themselves. Give them a little rope and they'd weave their own noose. So I kept playing the confused, overwhelmed fiancé for just a little bit longer. Because I knew that their next move would be the one that sealed their fate completely. So Emma, here's where everything finally exploded. 3 weeks after that preparation phase, David calls me all excited and says his family wants to have another financial planning meeting at their house. But this time they'd brought in reinforcements. When I walked into their living room, there was Mr. Peterson, the financial advisor again, plus this new guy in an expensive suit who introduced himself as their family attorney. David's sitting there with this huge grin like he's about to present me with the best gift ever. His mom Linda has prepared this elaborate lunch spread, and Ashley's practically bouncing in her chair with excitement. Richard starts the meeting by saying they've finalized the paperwork to make everything official. Then this family attorney slides this thick folder across the table toward me. Inside are modified trust documents, power of attorney forms, and get this, a marriage prenup that would give David automatic access to my inheritance if anything happened to me. All of it perfectly legal looking, professionally prepared, with spaces for my signature highlighted in yellow. The attorney explains how these documents would protect both families' interests and ensure proper financial oversight of my inheritance. David leans over and whispers, "See, babe? Now you won't have to stress about managing everything alone. We'll handle it together." I'm looking at these papers and Emma, I swear I almost started laughing. Because while they're sitting there so proud of their little intervention, they have no idea what's about to hit them. I set the folder down and said very calmly, "Before I sign anything, I have a few questions about the legal basis for these documents." That's when I pulled out my phone and opened the recording app. Right there in front of all of them. "First question," I said, "Mr. Peterson, how exactly did you obtain my private financial information for your presentations? Because those numbers came from documents that were photographed without my permission." Mr. Peterson's face went white. He started stammering about standard preliminary research. "Second question, Ashley. How many times have you entered my grandparents' house without my explicit permission? And did you know that unauthorized entry onto private property is considered trespassing in Oregon?" Ashley's bouncing stopped immediately. She looked at David like she was waiting for him to rescue her. "Third question, David. When you photographed my bank statements and investment documents, did you consider that accessing someone's private financial records without consent constitutes identity theft under federal law?" The room went completely silent. You could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the corner. David tried to recover. "Jess, what are you talking about? I was just organizing our paperwork." That's when I smiled and pulled out my tablet. "Our paperwork? Let me show you what I've been organizing." I opened the folder Daniel had prepared. Screenshots of Ashley's unauthorized real estate listing for my house. Photos of the contractors she'd brought through without permission. Audio recordings of their family meetings where they discussed restructuring my trust for their benefit. Most importantly, I had the security camera footage of Ashley bringing real estate agents through my house while I was at work. Linda gasped when she saw herself on camera saying, "Don't worry, Jessica will come around. She's always been easy to manipulate." Richard's jaw dropped when he heard his own voice saying, "Once we get control of that trust, we can finally expand the hardware store properly." But the absolute best moment was watching David's face when I played the recording of him telling Ashley, "She has no idea how much I know about her finances. I've been tracking everything for months." David stood up so fast he knocked over his chair. "Jessica, where did you get these recordings? You can't just record people without their consent." I looked him straight in the eye and said, "Actually, Oregon is a one-party consent state. As long as one person in the conversation knows they're being recorded, it's completely legal. I'm that person." That's when their family attorney cleared his throat and said, "I think there's been a misunderstanding here. Perhaps we should reconsider this meeting." But I wasn't done yet. "Oh, there's more," I said, pulling up Daniel's contact information. "My estate attorney has already filed preliminary reports with the county about attempted inheritance fraud. The State Bar Association is reviewing Mr. Peterson's license for obtaining private financial information illegally." Ashley started crying. Actual tears. "Jessica, we're family. "You can't do this to us." And that's when I delivered the line I'd been practicing for weeks. "You're absolutely right, Ashley. Family doesn't try to steal from each other. Family doesn't forge documents. And family definitely doesn't bring strangers through their dead grandparents' house to plan unauthorized sales." David was pacing now, running his hands through his hair. "Jessica, you're taking this way too seriously. We were just trying to help you." I stood up, collected my things and headed toward the door. But before I left, I turned around one last time. "By the way, David, our engagement is over. And just so everyone knows, that $5 million inheritance you've all been planning to spend, it's locked in an irrevocable trust where none of you will ever touch a single penny." The last thing I heard as I walked out was Richard yelling, "You can't do this to us. We had an agreement." But I could and I had. And the best part? This was just the beginning of their consequences. The aftermath was absolutely beautiful, Emma. Within 48 hours of walking out of that house, Daniel had already filed criminal fraud charges against David, Ashley, and Richard with the district attorney's office. The evidence was overwhelming. We had David on recording admitting to photographing my private financial documents. Ashley caught on security cameras bringing unauthorized real estate agents through my property. Richard discussing how they planned to restructure my trust for the family's benefit. Most damaging of all, that family attorney they'd brought in hadn't just prepared fraudulent documents. He'd used a fake notary seal. A federal crime that carries up to 5 years in prison. David called me 17 times that first night. 17. I didn't answer a single one. But I listened to every voicemail, and Emma, they were pathetic. He went from angry threats to desperate bargaining to actual sobbing apologies. The best one was him saying, "Jessica, you're destroying our family over money. How can you be so cold?" Our family. Like we were ever actually family to them instead of just a financial opportunity. 3 days later, Ashley was arrested at her apartment. Turns out, the real estate fraud scheme wasn't limited to my house. Daniel's investigation uncovered that she'd been running similar scams on elderly homeowners across 3 counties. She'd been targeting people who'd recently lost spouses, convincing them to sign property transfer documents under the guise of estate planning assistance, then selling their homes out from under them while they were still grieving. My case was just the one that finally brought her whole operation crashing down. Richard's hardware store got raided by federal investigators who found evidence that he'd been using customer credit information to open fraudulent business loans. The man who'd lectured me about family financial transparency had been stealing from his own customers for years. But David? His consequences were the most satisfying of all. That fancy job he was so proud of? Gone within a week. Turns out his employer had a strict morality clause, and being under federal investigation for inheritance fraud violates that pretty decisively. The professional references he'd been building for years? Worthless. Word travels fast in Portland's business community, and nobody wants to hire someone who tried to steal their fiancé's inheritance. Most importantly, all those expensive purchases he'd made assuming he'd have access to my money? The European honeymoon deposits, the luxury watch, the new car lease. All of it came due while he was unemployed and facing legal bills. Linda actually had the nerve to call me 2 weeks after the arrests. She left this long voicemail about how I was tearing apart a good family, and how David made mistakes but didn't deserve to have his life ruined. I saved that voicemail, Emma. Sometimes when I need a good laugh, I play it back and remember how this woman thought I should sacrifice my grandparents' legacy to protect her criminal son's feelings. As for me, the moment I walked out of their house that day, I felt this incredible weight lift off my shoulders. Not just from ending the engagement, but from finally understanding what my grandfather Harold meant when he used to say, "Jessica, the most expensive mistake you can make is trusting people who see you as a resource instead of a person." David and his family never saw me as Jessica. They saw me as $5 million with legs. Every conversation, every family dinner, every moment of fake intimacy was just them calculating how to access my inheritance. But here's what they never understood. That money wasn't just numbers in an account. It represented my grandparents' lifetime of sacrifice, love, and hope for my future. Harold built his shipping business from nothing so I could have opportunities he never had. Margaret saved every penny from her teaching salary so I could pursue my dreams without financial stress. Protecting their legacy wasn't about greed or selfishness. It was about honoring the people who loved me unconditionally and wanted me to have security and independence. 6 months after everything went down, I used part of the trust to start my own consulting business helping other people protect inherited assets from predatory family members. Turns out my experience wasn't as unique as I thought. I've helped dozens of clients identify red flags, document suspicious behavior, and create legal barriers against inheritance fraud. Every case reminds me why I fought so hard to protect what my grandparents left me. David contacted me one final time about a year later. A short email saying he was moving to another state for a fresh start and wanted to apologize for how things ended. I didn't respond. Not because I was still angry, but because I'd moved so far beyond that chapter of my life that engaging felt unnecessary. The last I heard, he was working at a call center in Phoenix and living with roommates. Ashley got 18 months in federal prison for the fraud scheme. Richard lost the hardware store and is driving delivery trucks at 67 years old. Meanwhile, I'm sitting in my grandfather's house every weekend, tending my grandmother's rose garden, running a successful business that helps protect other people from exactly what they tried to do to me. Sometimes I walk through those same rooms where my grandparents raised me and I think about how proud they'd be. Not just that I protected their legacy, but that I transformed their sacrifice into something that helps other families. The most important lesson I learned through all of this is that when people show you who they really are, believe them immediately. Don't make excuses, don't rationalize their behavior, don't hope they'll change. David showed me he was someone who would violate my privacy and plan my financial future without including me in the conversation. His family showed me they believed entitled to money they hadn't earned from people they barely knew. I believed what their actions told me about their character, and that belief saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life. Because imagine if I hadn't transferred everything into that trust. Imagine if I'd married David and woken up one day to find my inheritance gone, my house sold, my grandparents' legacy erased to fund their failing businesses and expensive lifestyle. Instead, I trusted my instincts, protected what mattered, and ended up stronger, wiser, and completely free from people who saw my love as weakness and my trust as opportunity. My advice to anyone listening who might be in a similar situation? Your inheritance, your savings, your financial security, these aren't bargaining chips for keeping toxic people happy. They're your foundation for building the life you deserve. Don't let anyone convince you that protecting yourself makes you selfish. The people who say that are usually the ones trying to benefit from your lack of boundaries. And remember, real love doesn't come with demands for access to your bank account. Real family doesn't plot behind your back about how to spend your money. Real partnerships are built on respect, not financial exploitation. I learned that the hard way, but I learned it in time. And now, sitting in my grandmother's favorite chair, watching the sunset over the same ocean she loved, I know I made the right choice. Sometimes the best thing you can do is trust yourself enough to walk away from people who don't deserve you, even when they're wearing engagement rings and calling themselves family.
Wow, Jessica. What an absolutely incredible story of standing up for yourself and protecting what matters most. It's amazing how you turned their manipulation into empowerment for yourself and others. Thank you so much for sharing this with us. And to everyone listening, if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to Story Threads podcast for more incredible stories of courage and justice. We'll see you next time.